Okay, so what if the ground beneath your feet, the time ticking by, even your memories, what if none of that is quite as solid as we think? What if reality can, well, slip sometimes, glitch?
It's a pretty wild idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
And yeah, that's exactly what we're getting into today, looking at this collection of sources. You and I have been digging through this
Yeah.
whole concept of glitches or anomaly lines in reality.
Right. And our goal, our mission for this deep dive is really to pull out the key stuff from this material. What could these weird moments, these unexpected shifts actually mean?
Uh-huh. Are they just quirks? Are brains messing up?
Or maybe something, deeper
Yeah.
about existence itself.
Yeah. And based on what's in the sources, when we say glitch, we're not just talking computers. It's like a temporary error, a malfunction. But, and this is key, it could be an error in how our brain processes things.
Okay.
Or, and this is the really interesting part from thinkers like Kuhn and Tegmark mentioned in the sources, it could be an actual flicker in the fabric of reality.
Wow. That definitely connects to that quote from Dr. Carlo Rovelli, doesn't it? The one highlighted in the material.
Oh yeah, the reality is not what it seems.
That's the one. It's only stable because we've agreed it should be. That just sets the stage perfectly, I think.
Totally. So for this deep dive, we've got a few areas mapped out based on the sources. First, we'll look at those strange personal stories people share, the everyday stuff that just feels off.
Okay, the anecdotes.
Then we shift gears a bit. Look at some actual scientific anomalies, things researchers have documented that, well, don't quite fit.
And then we get into the big theories.
Exactly. Physics, philosophy, the models trying to explain how reality could even do something like glitching.
Okay.
And finally, we'll touch on the tools and methods being used right now, like how are people trying to investigate this stuff today?
Sounds like a plan. So let's try looking at things a bit differently for a while. You mentioned those personal stories. A lot of this seems to bubble up from there, right? People sharing things online.
Oh, definitely. Places like that Our Glitch They Matrix subreddit.
Yeah.
It's full of them.
Right, stories about things just vanishing and then turning up somewhere totally random. Or that really intense deja vu feeling.
Exactly. Or people remembering history differently, like the whole Mandela Effect
That's
thing.
classic, yeah.
Or weird time stuff like moments looping or skipping.
No, it's super easy to just say, that's just memory, right? Our brains make mistakes.
Of course. And cognitive psychology has solid explanations for a lot of it. Memory isn't like a video recording, it's reconstructive. It can be faulty, easily influenced.
For sure.
The sources acknowledge that, absolutely. But they also kind of pose the question, are all of these just brain farts? Or could even a tiny fraction point to something external, an actual anomaly out there?
And that's where maybe science comes in, offering some, well, maybe tentative clues. The sources pointed to some specific scientific puzzles.
Yeah, like those weird results from CERN. Remember that? Back in 2016, they were measuring how these particles, muons, decay.
Muons. Right, they're like heavier electrons. Kind of.
Pretty much, yeah. Heavy cousins. And the data they got on the decay rates, it just didn't line up statistically with the standard model of particle physics, the really established stuff.
Didn't line up. How?
Well, it briefly looked like something called lepton universality might be off.
Lepton universality. Hang on. That's the idea that different leptons, like electrons and muons, should act the same way in certain situations.
Exactly. A really fundamental assumption. And the data was saying, maybe not always.
Yeah.
It was a big enough blip that some physicists were like, whoa, is this new physics? Something beyond the standard model.
So the tiny crack in the rule book.
Kind of. A potential glitch, yeah, right down at the particle level.
Okay, that's fascinating. Tiny scale. What about bigger stuff? More visible?
Well, the material also brings up the Hessdalen lights in Norway.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about those. Often gets lumped in with UFOs and, like, pop culture.
Right, there's definitely that angle. But the scientific studies mentioned in the sources, they say these lights are genuinely weird. They don't seem to be weather or earthquakes or known atmospheric things.
So what could they be?
Some of the hypotheses mentioned lean towards things like plasma anomalies, maybe? Or even the idea that the valley itself sits on some kind of geological or magnetic weak spot. A natural fault line almost.
Like a spot where the rules bend a little easier.
That's kind of the concept the sources explore, yeah. Calling it a potential natural anomaly line.
Interesting. And you mentioned the Mandela effect. How does that connect back? Does quantum physics have anything to say about, like, misremembering history?
Okay, so this is definitely more out there, but the sources touch on something called quantum cognition.
Quantum cognition.
Oh.
Okay, blending brains and quantum mechanics. How does that explain remembering Nelson Mandela's death wrong?
Yeah, it's speculative for sure. But the idea, as laid out in the material, is what if our brains aren't just classical machines? What if thinking, especially memory or making choices, sometimes uses quantum-like processes?
You mean like superposition, entanglement,
Yep.
but happening in our thoughts.
That's the rough idea. So applying it to memory, maybe our brain sometimes taps into multiple possible realities or timelines linked to an event. So what feels like a simple misremembering might actually be, in this very theoretical view, a flicker from a slightly different reality branch bleeding through.
Whoa.
It connects that subjective feeling of a memory glitch back to potentially fundamental physics.
Okay, so a glitch could be my brain just briefly touching another possibility. That changes how you think about memory and reality.
It definitely throws up some huge questions, doesn't it?
Mm.
And if we even just entertain the idea that some of this stuff is more than mistakes or stories, what kind of theories could possibly make sense of it?
Right, this is where we get into the really big picture ideas, yeah. The sources mentioned a few heavy hitters.
It's exactly. First up, you've got simulation theory.
Ah, the matrix idea
Hmm.
that we're all living in a giant computer program.
That's the gist, yeah. Popularized by Nick Bostrom. And if that were the case, well, glitches could just be bugs in the code, right? Rendering errors, maybe lag, maybe the system updating itself.
So like deja vu is the simulation stuttering, buffering.
In that model, yeah, something like that. The sources suggest it could explain those moments where things feel inexplicably off.
Okay, that's one framework. What else?
Then there's the multiverse,
Yeah.
specifically Hugh Everett's many worlds idea from quantum mechanics.
Many worlds where every possibility actually happens, just in its own separate universe, branching off constantly.
That's the one. Every quantum event creates splits.
Hmm.
So the source would propose maybe a glitch is a tiny interaction, or like you said earlier, a bleed through between these parallel universes.
So when I lose my cues, maybe they just slipped into the universe next door for a minute. Slight chuckle. That's
Yeah.
a fun way to put it. But yeah, directionally, that's the kind of interpretation within that theory. Especially for those stories where people feel like they've suddenly shifted reality somehow.
Mind-boggling. Okay, simulation, multiverse. What's the third one?
The third idea presented is something like localized space-time instability.
Okay, what's that about? The actual fabric of space and time.
Yeah. Some cutting-edge theories in quantum gravity are exploring the idea that space-time isn't smooth at the tiniest scales, the Planck scale. Down there, where quantum effects and gravity meet, space-time might be more like a foam or granular.
Foamy. Like
Oh.
bubbly and chaotic instead of flat.
Good analogy. And the idea the sources put forward is, what if in some places, or at some times, this quantum foam gets extra unstable?
Creating little pockets of weirdness.
Exactly. Local anomalies, places where maybe time flows differently for an instant, or space warps unexpectedly, or cause and effect gets jumbled. The material uses that image of the fabric of space-time itself kind of fraying, right at the edges of what we can perceive. Wow. Okay. That's a lot to think about. So we have these strange reports, these scientific hints, these massive theories. How are we actually trying to pin any of this down today? What are scientists doing?
Right, that's the crucial next step.
Yeah.
Moving beyond just collecting stories. The sources mention, for example, a 2022 study out of Harvard's program in cognitive anomalies. They used EEG.
EEG measuring brainwaves.
They looked at the brain activity of people who reported experiencing these kinds of reality distortions, compared them to control groups.
Did they find a glitch signal in the brain?
Not one single clear signature, no. It's more complex. But they did find that people reporting these high-stress perception shifts showed brainwave patterns with, well, anomalous similarities. It suggests something distinct is happening neurologically in those moments, even if we don't fully understand it yet.
Okay, that's concrete progress. What about looking for glitches out there, not just in our heads, using tech?
Yeah, absolutely. We're deploying some really advanced stuff now. Quantum sensors, AI algorithms trained to spot anomalies, and putting them in places where you might expect subtle effects to be detectable, like way down at the South Pole, or using deep space telescopes.
So basically setting up really sensitive listening posts for reality hiccups.
Kind of, yeah. High-precision monitoring systems designed to catch tiny fluctuations in the environment, or even space-time itself, that just don't fit the expected patterns. The AI part is key, because it can sift through mountains of data and flag statistical oddities humans would just miss.
It feels like we're developing better ears, to listen for the universe whispering strange things.
That's a good way to put it.
Hmm.
And it makes you wonder, right? As our instruments get even more precise, what else might we start to detect?
Which really brings us back to the start, doesn't it? After looking through all this material, the stories, the science hints, the wild theories, the current research, is there really an anomaly line? A place where reality itself kind of stumbles?
Well, the sources don't give us a simple yes or no, do they? It's left hanging, in a way.
Right.
Maybe it's not that the world is broken. Maybe it's just the edge of what we currently understand.
Maybe where we see a glitch, the universe isn't messing up, it's just kind of winking at us.
Or, as the sources put it even more compellingly, maybe it's staring back.
That line really stuck with me too. The more we measure, the stranger reality becomes.
It really challenges how much we assume about everything just being stable and predictable.
And that leads right into that final big takeaway from the material we explored. If reality can glitch, then consciousness, physics, and even time itself may not be absolutes, but shifting agreements.
So that changes everything.
It really does. Makes you look around a bit differently, doesn't it? With maybe a bit more wonder and maybe a tiny bit more uncertainty.
Absolutely.
Well, hopefully this deep dive has given all of you listening something to chew on. Keep being curious, keep asking those big questions, because that line between what's real and what's anomalous, it might just be thinner than we think.